Hey guys, welcome to the session. Right, in this session, I thought I'd do some quick, short videos really, just explaining some of the stuff that I do and how I do it. And one of the biggest things that's ever helped me in Ableton is creating these kind of pseudo grids and templates for later use. So what I'm going to do here is show you how I lay out a track using building blocks to lay something out, and then how when I work with a template I might customize it as I go. So let's get stuck in. So looking at Ableton at the moment, obviously a blank canvas that I've got here. So what I normally do, first thing I'm going to do is create these kind of grids that I mentioned. So just follow along, have a look. As always, if you see something better or you've got another tip and suggestion, let me know. These are fairly new, and I'm fairly new to setting out streams. So at the moment, not a lot of followers. In fact, I think I've got 11 followers on YouTube. But a bit of background about me, melodic music. Crikey, I can't even speak. Modern music for funerals. I've been developing and producing music now for about 12 years. Most of my stuff is kind of hidden. I don't really release it, but it all started a long time ago with a project of mine that said, hey, can I build a studio? If I build a studio, can I make a track? If I make that track, can I release it? And if I release it, can I sell it? I managed to do all of that in a month. So obviously pretty chuffed with myself, and that's kind of where it started from here. Myself, I used to be a DJ many years ago. Travelling about a fair bit. My styles were generally house, deep house, then into technical, industrial techno, and more of the kind of harder stuff before I kind of gave it all up when I had children. So let's get stuck in. So first thing I'm going to do is use a Midi track. Most of my tracks with the ambient stuff are generally based around 120, 60 or 100 BPM. I like the 120 because it's a nice multiplication of 60, which gives you the seconds. But for this one here, I'm going to stick to 120, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of the MIDI tracks above to start laying out these templates. So first things first, let's give that a rename so I know it's a grid. I'm going to set my grid on here to 8 bars. And I'm going to build these blocks, give them some colour that I like. Colours that I generally use are quite complementary to each other. They sit and they add contrast. So I'm going to double this one up to about that sort of size, and then I'm going to work my way across, looking at the timeline at the bottom to around about 14. There you go, 1445 will do me. I may adjust that in a minute, but if I come back now, I can see that every 8th bar I've got an alternate colour on the top row. So what I'm going to do now is create a duplicate of that on the row below. Whoop, not like that, I'm not. And I'm going to pull that out as a double. I'm going to join it, because those kind of lines you get when you extend out a clip kind of wind me up for these sort of things. That's a little bit of OCD, I guess. Right, double that one, go back to the colour that I was using. And likewise, what I'm going to do is pull these out as well. Okay, then I'm going to create one more. It's going to be another subset of that. Oh, I keep doing that, man. Copy, place that on the bottom. And I'm going to double that out as well. Duplicate out. And then I'm going to pull these across. So there I have my 3 main grids that I kind of work to. So I'm going to copy that, rename them. Colours that I kind of like working on, the oranges for these. I'm going to bring them right out like so. Then I'm going to create one more MIDI track when Ableton wakes up. If Ableton wakes up, there you go. So the top 3 are static grids. So they go from 8 to 16, 16 to 32 bars. The fourth grid that I make is generally the working grid. This is going to show me where I'm going to have my kind of build-ups, build-downs, breaks, drops, and all sorts of things like that, depending on the genre. Now, I use these for all types of work. So if I'm making a house track, I'll use a grid like this. If I'm making one of my atmospheric tracks or some kind of dark atmospheric piece, I'll do the same, but the fourth row that you see here becomes quite dynamic, and I normally adjust it as I go along. So for the moment, it's going to kind of appear empty. So I'm going to rename that to my working grid. And I'll give that a different orange color as well. Next, below that, I generally add my sidechains. So we can have different sidechains for different types of effects, which I'll come to in a minute. For now, on the working grid, just going to lay out something like this. I'm going to give them different colors as I go. It doesn't really matter what the color is, but it's just something to aim for. Top of my head sort of stuff. Generally, coming to the end of the track, I'll use a red, and at the beginning, actually, I generally use a green. So as I can see, I've got various colors in here now, and it doesn't really matter what they are at this moment in time. Okay, change that color because it's proper nasty. This is again where my OCD kicks in. I get stuck wasting my time adding colours all the time. So at the moment, look, I've got a grid there. I've got different sections of a track. But actually, what I generally use for this sort of music is something a little bit larger. If I look at a 14-minute track, I like to build my tracks around what are known as phases. And in my phases, I'm going to build up and build down, generally around them. I kind of really enjoy working to symmetry, which is a big part of the way I make music. You know, I kind of like that balance to happen. So in that case, actually what I might do is make another grid, but make it larger for these kind of phases. Change that color back, and then I'll bring those in. Now looking at that, what I may need to do, because of this kind of symmetry, if I want to keep to that symmetry, I'd extend out my top grid as well, right, to match it. So here I'm up to almost, what, 16 and a half minutes. So I'm going to bring up the template or bring it down the tempo. But for now, I'm going to leave it exactly as it is. So it's not that important for what we're doing at the moment. You just get an idea for kind of how I work. So that's that. So let's jump back to the side chains. And one of the reasons I create side chains is that I don't generally always work to a 4/4 kind of rhythm within the ambient stuff. I use my side chains really to create pulses, and I'm going to use compressors and ducking systems to work to different rhythms, and I might program those rhythms into the MIDI space here. So if we're going to do a simple 4x4, of course, easy to do. We'll come down to the bottom here. I'm going to put it into quarters, hit the C3, and I'm going to replicate that out like so. I'm only doing it this way because I'm in that kind of view, but what I could choose to do is bring that out there. Side chains I normally stick as white. So I'm going to rename that sidechain 1/4, and we'll duplicate that as well. And this one, like I say, might be more rhythmic. So I might just use something similar to that. Now the reason I extend these out quite a way is because I might have a more complex sidechain going on. I might want to change this kind of static pattern that I've got, which is 1 off 1 1, 1 off 1 1. So at the moment I don't particularly know what I'm going to do with this track. So for example here, I might change the way that rhythm works at the end, just giving me that, and we'll duplicate that across. So as you can see, looking in at these now, we've got different types of sidechain that we can use. And I'll call that varied A. Likewise, I may create another one now, which might be exactly built such as this. Okay, and I'll generally do one more which looks like a side, some kind of side trance bass line, but it works for me. So generally what I use for my sidechain is something high. I don't generally use kicks. It doesn't really matter what you use. So let's have a look. Let's stick something in. Let's just go down to our samples. And let's have a look at a clap. And again, at the moment, it doesn't really matter as long as I've got that kind of... Yeah, that's going to do me for now. Let's drag that in there. What I'm going to do... So that's normally the first one. The last three, what I'm normally going to do is make them inputs and fetch them all from that one there. So they're all sounding the same, they're all firing away. What is really important that I do is I don't send them anywhere to masters, I just use them as sends only. Yeah, you can't do it that way on this. Okay, no, actually what I'm going to do is rather than make them auto input like so, I'm actually going to just create individual ones because I'm being lazy. Bish bash bosh, sends only, all ins. Oh, actually, can you do it? Let's have a look. 2, 3. Yeah, I think you can do it, but I'm not going to. I'm going to copy that top one and I'm going to put it into each layer. So you'll see some things when I make new tracks, they pop up. So my default track template, if you like. So if I get rid of these two here, I create a new track. What you're going to see is these three racks appear here. Console 1 for what I have on the desk system here. I don't think you can see it in that camera angle, so let's see if we can change it to, yeah, to this one here. So what you can see is I've got in front of me, I've got the soft tube console 1 faders and the console 1 control in the middle here. So first thing that I need on every single rack that I'm going to use is the console 1 app, and what that enables me to do, if you keep an eye on the volume, if I spin this back to, I think it's about this screen here. Yeah, if we play that one. So hopefully you can see pretty much how the console 1 works. So if I look at track 1, if I click on track 1, I've got a white dot over here on the console fader. Now if you keep an eye on the volume over here, you'll see it move up and down with the fader, right? So that's pretty much bog standard, what you expect it to do. Okay, so at the moment we've got our grid above, we've got a working grid which is going to lay out the template of the track. So let's say if we are working on a house track, we're going to have our intro, we're going to have our verses, our chorus, our bridge, breaks, the drop, and the outro and things like that. And I tend to lay those out in the grid above. Not only does it help me kind of think and visually look at what I want the track to be, but it kind of speeds up the process for me as well. One word of caution on that is not to get transfixed on the grid, right? If you're building something and it doesn't necessarily feel right, well, you just change the grid. So the grid for me is one of two things, and we're only talking about the working grid. It either changes to the track that I'm making, or it forms the track that I'm making. I normally find that if I'm making the ambient type of tracks, then the grid that I create above is kind of static, right? It gives me the phases that I want to work to. But if I'm working in house, techno or something like that, the working grid becomes rather dynamic. Okay, let's move on to the next part. In fact, I'm going to take a drink quickly. Cool, so we've got our side chains kicking off at different rates. We can use those in a moment. Next thing that I generally look at is, let's zoom right out of the project. And again, this is quite a hefty long project at the moment. So what I could do really is cut this back probably to around about the 13, 12 and a half mark. But again, that's just me being a little bit heavy on the OCD and not liking to change the shape of my grid above. But for this, it doesn't matter, right? So let's put some markers in. First thing I generally do is I'm going to pull everything across just by 16 bars, because I like this kind of space to be at the beginning of what I'm doing. So I normally start around 17. In fact, sometimes I do, right? Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I ignore that rule. And what I'll do is, towards the end, when I'm whacking out the stems, I'll move the whole lot across. And generally we leave this space at the beginning because certain plugins, they're going to need some time to kick in, right? So we have some blank space at the beginning. So let's stick that in. So my first one, start. And let's go right to the end of my project. Obviously, end. And then there's another one that I add to the end as well. Got no room because I've run out, so I do it here, which is called my FX tail end. And what I can do is drag that out a little bit. And that's just going to give time for reverbs and everything else that I've got going on to die down when I kind of exit the track, right, in a stem. So again, I'm going to add another block there, and I'll give it some color. Cool, like so, and at the beginning as well. So at the moment I'm going to stick to making a template for ambient, and I mentioned earlier I kind of like using these phases, so I'm going to drop my phase markers in as well. Phase 2, because I consider phase 1 to be the start to be phase 1. Phase 3. Phase 4. I can't emphasize enough how important, if you're getting started out in Ableton, these markers are, and correctly labeling your stuff so you got your shit in order, because it's just a faster way to work, right? So obviously, working under the principles of a tidy desk and all that sort of stuff, it's really important that when you're doing this, guys, is that you just keep an eye and make sure that what you've got going on is clean, tidy, and easy to use. Now, if you're working on a project for, I don't know, say you and a mate or someone else that you're sharing work with, you're doing remote swapping, then actually even more important, right, to make sure that you've got everything kind of clean and tidy. Now, look, another thing that I do in these grids is generally put comments in here as well. So in this one, a simple comment for me is going to be start phase 2, right? And then I'm going to put some yada yada yada, some bits, maybe the mood, maybe the how it's going or whatever. So I've got some kind of marker in there. Likewise, sorry, I've put it in the wrong one. What a donut. Delete that. I generally put them in here, right? RV. Phase 3. Phase 4. and then also down there at the beginning. So that's pretty much how I lay out the grids and my side chains. So working on templates as well. I'm sure most of you already know this sort of stuff, but I was referring earlier to what happens when I make a new track. I get these 3 racks that I've put in, and that's generally the EQ8, the utility, and a console. Easy enough to do, right? You know, we just go in here. Let's say I wanted to add something else. For example, maybe an Ableton compressor. What I could now do is, also important to mention at this point, the color you choose, the name and everything else will also go into this template or this default when you create it, right? So maybe I might want to go in here and do a -3 dB. If I want to go in here and I'm going to put maybe, I don't know, doesn't matter what you call it, right? You could leave it exactly as it is. All I'm going to do is right click, save as default audio. Do I want to replace the one that I've got? Yeah, sure, why not for this. Now let's create another one, which on the Mac is Apple T. And there you see I'm getting these each and every time. And as I do that, the sliders on my desk are also lighting up with the brand new fader. So let's get back out of here. So pretty easy to do, really, building these templates. Now actually we can do the other template as well, or the default pattern for our Midi. So I'm going to copy all of those 4, and I'm going to create a Midi track, which is Apple Shift and T. And in here, for now, I'll just delete everything and stick in what I've just done. But now at this point in time, I can right click on that again, and I can make it a default. But obviously what I want to do in here is rename it, and I want this to be so I'm just going to call this one Midi. Now to be honest, I don't do the names, right? I just use it as it is, but I'm going to save as a default for Midi as well. For now, just to show you it working, let's put a double compressor in there, and then you'll see the difference each time I bring a new track. So let's delete all of those. Underneath here, I'm going to create a new Midi track. There it is with the extra compressor for Midi. Not that we need it, it's just an example. And then I'm going to create a simple audio track as well, right? And as you can see, there's a stark difference between the two, which is one's got 2 compressors, one hasn't. So I'm going to set it up now as if it's something that I need, which is I don't use the compressors. I don't need the word template. I'm just going to have the word Midi and a dash. Sorry, just Midi for now, right? Let's give it a different color, and I'm going to save that as a template. So as you can see now, once again, create a new Midi track. There you go. Let's go back to my audio. I don't want the compressor. I'm going to rename it to audio, and I'm going to save as default and overrule that as well. So there we are. That's how you create the 3 of them. Now something you can't do in Ableton, which I think is really pony, is the fact that if I do this, so let's say I put a Midi track, another Midi track, an audio track, an audio track. I thought you could do colors as well in Ableton. I'm sure that's to do with the way I've set the preferences up, but for now, whatever. So let's say I want to put all 4 of these into a folder or a group. So Apple G, it's going to give me up the group. I like my groups generally to be white. What I can't do on here is there is no save for template. That's because the coders at Ableton are quite lazy, and there's loads of stuff in this program that it could do with, and they just haven't bothered to do that. Right, so I've got no way of actually adding a template to any of the group functionality, right? So that's just what it is. So if I was to take these 2 at the bottom, make a new group, there you go, I start with a fresh. But what you can do as a bus group, obviously fairly easy to do. Let's just say I'm going to use those 3. Let me group those in. And what I can do now is save the whole thing. And I might do something like, for me it's always, wait, I've got someone trying to phone me. Meh, don't want that. So I'm going to save that. MMFF for me. Group bus. So now, fairly simple. I would normally drag that into my racks over there. So MF group bus, what I can now do is, there's my group, and I'll just drag it onto the group like that. That's it for this session. Job's a good one. I hope that is useful to someone, at least someone. Ever in our egotistical narcissism way, we like to be liked. So if you do like it or you've got a comment, jump on and let me know. That's me, Atsuhiko, wishing you all the best.